Welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast bringing guests together to share their expertise and advice on navigating business and education in a technology-driven world. From entrepreneurs to vendors, higher education to corporate leaders, we'll uncover their perspective regarding the latest trends and technologies impacting your career or business. Our podcast is made possible by Downing EdTech Consulting, where people and technology connect. Hosted by Cher Downing, an experienced executive spanning a higher education and corporate career with specific focus on the EdTech industry. Dr. Downing is also an international and national presenter, author, and regular media contributor. Now here is your host, EdTech strategist, Dr. Cher Downing.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to EdTech Speaks, a podcast where we want to share expertise and knowledge from experts that bring together business, education, and technology. I'm your host, Cher Downing, and I'm doubly excited today. And you guys know I get excited out there, but I'm doubly excited to introduce Rachel Porter to you. Rachel is the voice that you hear when you start to listen to our podcast every week. And she's the voice that wraps up our podcast every week. And I love that because her voice is much better than mine. It's professional. And so I'm so excited to have her on here today and talk to her about how she works in the voiceover world, what it is that she's doing, how she works with clients, and what you should know about this field. So Rachel, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
It's so fun to have you actually as a guest and not have you as here's the work we need done.
Yeah. It's fun to be on this receiving end and to be live. So
let's start out with your background. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and how you ended up in this field and also how this field fits into your life.
Sure. I live in the Midwest in Kansas City. I have 3 kiddos. I'm a full-time voice actor, so it's owning your own business. It's going out there, getting clients, relationships, auditions, things like that. So in high school, radio and TV was my favorite class. So I pursued that in college. My freshman year was taking a radio class, and the dean of the department pulled me aside and was like, "Your voice is really irritating. You probably shouldn't use it for anything." Okay.
Oh,
I was 18. I bawled my eyes out. I left that school and I kind of changed my trajectory, of what I thought I wanted to do. So, fast forward, got a different degree, worked in the PR field for a little bit, stayed home with my babies. And then I have a good friend that's a voice actor, and she kept saying, you're good at that. It's natural. It's what you used to love. You should try this. I'll show you how to set up your home studio and get going. And she was really pivotal in encouraging me along the way, because if anyone's an entrepreneur, they know you have highs and you have lows. And definitely even in that first year of voiceover, I thought, should I quit? Is this going well? Are people hearing me? Is it, am I growing? But it definitely, like a lot of businesses, it's the long haul. It's the mindset of thinking long term, building relationships, serving your clients well. So yeah, this is year 5 of business and I love it. I kind of specialize in e-learning and commercial work. And,
that is so true for our listeners. All of us have had someone who have just squashed us at some point in our life. And the difference is coming out of it and figuring out, okay, what am I going to do with this? I remember reading Meryl Streep said that on one of her first auditions, they told her she would not be an actor.
Wow.
And she had to ride the subway home. She was living in New York. And she said at the beginning of the subway, she got on and she was bawling and she was so upset. She said, people were staring at her, what is wrong with her? She said, and by the end of the subway ride, she said, I had made a personal resolve that I was going to show them. And I think she did. I think she did okay.
Yep.
So, and I think for our listeners, when Rachel talks about working in e-learning, we have hired her to be voiceovers for videos and audio pieces and courses, but she's also worked for some pretty big names like Patagonia and Taco Bell and Arby's. And she's worked with the Dairy Council. And so every once in a while, your voice still pops up. The commercials come up on TV and I hear it and I'm like, hey, that's Rachel.
Yeah.
So
I think that's what's fun about this field is every week is different for me. It can be like a commercial spot I'm doing that's living online, or I just did something for my college, like alma mater last week. I also, like, funny enough, just side note, I've done on-camera print work, like here in the Midwest. That's kind of been something I didn't expect. But so last week I played a nurse, like for MU Health. So I think that's going to live like promotionally here in the Midwest, recruiting nurses, things like that. So yeah, it's just super fun to see every week look different.
So talk to us a little bit about, obviously you got into this, you had a great mentor. I always like to point out when people have a mentor or someone that helps them get going, learn the trade, understand the pitfalls, because obviously she didn't say to you, oh, hey, let's do this, and you're just going to be, wealthy starting tomorrow. There's a long ticket to doing this. But talk to us a little bit about, what it took to become a voice actor and kind of what are the skill sets you had to do and training and such.
Yeah, it is really interesting because a lot of people will comment, they'll be fascinated by what I do. And then their first comment is, well, I don't have a voice for that. And it's not that at all. Everyone has a voice for something. It is acting. And this is going to sound so naive, but even when I first got into voiceover, I didn't realize the level of acting. Like, I'm not on stage with a person acting, but I'm with my microphone right here and I have a script in front of me and I'm setting the scene. So I think I learned early on, getting a coach, like a voiceover coach that I worked with regularly, really investing in that. I also took improv here locally, which really pushed me. So I think even being in this industry, it's grown me in my confidence and as a human being. But I think that's something about voiceover that is a tension in our industry because, sometimes people look at what I do and they're like, well, Joe in accounting can talk. Like, let's just have him narrate this course, and it's like, he can, but, has he done coaching? Does he do acting? Is he setting the scene? Is he, and even I've had people come to me after the fact and they're like, hey, we thought we could do this on our own. It turns out the time and effort from pulling that person away from their regular job or the editing, and they're trying to like post-process it on the back end. They didn't realize the noises and the edits and things like that. So I think, there's a lot to like share with people and help educate them in a respectful way of like, hey, like, pro football, Kansas City Chiefs right here, Patrick Mahomes. I mean, there's might be some guy that can throw a football, but Patrick Mahomes goes out and trains every day. And, he's really good at what he does for a reason. So I think the same goes for VOs. Sometimes people don't see the depths or the layers and the work that we go to kind of elevate what we do and just to serve our clients in that professional manner.
And I think for our listeners, if you've ever seen someone do voiceover for Disney animation, when you watch, Will Smith do the genie, or you watch when Robin Williams did voices for them, when any actor, they don't stand there in the studio in front of the microphone. You see them, they're moving, they're constantly improvising just as if they were acting on stage. And that's because then the true validity of what they're talking and saying, the experience is coming through their voice. And I think that's what makes the difference. When you hear a commercial, I mean, all of us have commercials in our head that we've heard for years. Mm-hmm. And, when we hear that voice, we just know. Even when you just hear a voice start, you're like, oh, that's Morgan Freeman. You just know because of the tone, but more so because of how he articulates things, when he pauses, how he, emphasizes certain words. It's just how he always delivers, and you get used to that, which is why we don't like when somebody new does a commercial. We're like, go back to the old guy. We don't like the new guy. But I think it's so important that our listeners understand that it's a valid field, and it can be with some work and some training and some focus, it can really be a lucrative career for you. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think there's a video out there I've even sent to clients a couple of times where I think Morgan Freeman is on Jimmy Kimmel and he's narrating a security camera on the streets of like Hollywood. There's just pointed down at the street, just people walking by, but then Morgan just starts improving and like narrating the scene. And it's good. Like, it's interesting, because he's giving people a story and telling it, and his inflection and his training and things like that. So yeah, it definitely makes a difference. I think good actors make it look easy. So sometimes you think, oh, well, that's really easy. But we've all seen bad acting, whether it's in a show or a radio commercial we hear. So that stands out when it is poorly done.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about, you've got a client, prospective client out there, and they want to select a VO. What are some tips for them in terms of getting started? Where do they find them? What should they look for?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts. So I'm going to try to focus them. So I would say referrals, word of mouth is huge. I mean, I personally love that for other types of projects too, of like, nothing goes further than someone else saying like, I loved this person. They were great. I would say in the voiceover world too, look for someone that's super responsive. We are very used to, as voice actors, having to turn things around even in 24 hours or less sometimes. So if you don't hear from a voice actor and you've inquired and it's been 3 or 4 days, that might be a sign of like, hey, they might not be getting the project back to me. This might be not a great fit. And then do you want a female or a male to narrate your course? That's very different there. On LinkedIn, just finding people with good referrals, great backgrounds, things like that is important. I would just ask a voice actor about turnaround times. I would ask them about their pricing and what it involves, because honestly, it's a field where if you ask 10 different voice actors, you're going to sometimes get 10 different answers. I had a client even a couple weeks ago say like, hey, I love sending you stuff because I know it's going to get done and you're consistent and you always respond. So something even as simple as like someone that responds to you quickly is a big deal. So.
And we were talking about this earlier, finding the right voice too, for whatever your project is, really aligning that. Nobody wants to hear, a child's voice for a very serious adult subject. And nobody wants to go to Disneyland hearing a very serious, Shakespearean type reading.
Yes.
Of heading to Disneyland. You want to hear somebody who's fun, who's light, who, moves forward. And I think sometimes it's hard to tell that in hiring people. So is it a good idea to ask for some sample work?
Yeah, absolutely. So a voice actor should have a demo. So either whether it's a commercial demo or e-learning, whatever area they're specializing in and you're needing. So I would listen to their demo. And some clients just want that and pick off a demo, and that's totally fine. Honestly, that's simpler for us. So I like that when that happens. But it's also okay to ask for a custom read of your project. And actually, I request that with new clients. Like if you and I were working together for the first time, I would say, hey, send me part of that script and I'll send you a 30-second sample before we record this whole thing in its entirety. Because another thing about voiceover, it's so subjective. So your warm and friendly might be different than my warm and friendly, or your conversational read might be different than my idea of a conversational read. And so I think I learned the hard way early on of like, you don't want to record something and then the client come back and say, actually, can we tweak this? And they might not realize the level of like editing that went into it and speaking and things like that. So you want to get the upfront approval. So I think any voice actor would be willing to submit a sample of that exact script that you need.
And I think if they didn't, that's kind of a telltale sign also.
Yes. I think that would be a red flag as well. If they're like, nope, that's not what I do. And you're like, okay, I'll move on.
Because I can remember way back when we started, and we were, for listeners, we were in a rush because the pandemic had started and people were anxious to move things from classrooms and conference rooms into online. And I can remember you doing a short piece. I listened to it and I was like, I think it sounds good. But because it was for a project for my client, I'm going to send it to them, let them hear it and make sure it's what they want.
Yeah.
They came back and said, terrific, let's do it. And then we were good to go. And we did many, many projects after that.
Yep.
But even, when you're working in more than one group, or you have a client that's actually paying for a project that's being put together, particularly in the e-learning space, I think it's vital that you pull them in. And, it's not my responsibility, nor should it be, to say, oh, yeah, that sounds great. This is what we're going to go with, because we could finish the whole product and the client could come back to me and say, yeah, I don't really like it. I want them to be happy, and I want to be respectful of your time because we were turning things around quickly. I think.
Go ahead.
No, I think that's so valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I even ended up creating a document when people book with me that are new, just kind of outlining all those things. It also outlines, my invoicing terms and the audio file you want. But I do say, hey, have all the decision makers sign off on this sample. Because there's also been times you send something to like what you're saying, maybe the middleman or someone kind of working with the client. They say, okay, but the director of HR is actually like, well, we actually need to do it this way. So getting all those people on board, like you're saying, is really smart from the front end, get that approval, then move forward.
And that does keep costs down for projects, but it also ensures that the quality of what you do doesn't get diminished where people say, oh, it wasn't really very good, or we weren't really very happy with her. Well, it wasn't that they weren't happy with you. It was that the information was kind of skewered in how it got processed.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
So, I know you always talk because you always tell me this. You always ask me when we're starting a new project, what's the story? So talk a little bit about telling the story and why that's so important.
Yeah, I have a kid. So there's this show, I think it's still on the air, called Busy Town Mysteries. And there's this catchy like British song. I'm not going to sing it, but he asks like who, what, when, where, why, and how, right? Because he's solving a mystery in Busy Town, going around with his spyglass. But those are questions I like to ask when I get a script, like to tell that story. Okay, who am I? Like, who am I talking to? Why is the story needing to be told? Why is it important? What's going on in the scene? When is this taking place? Right now versus the 1970s versus futuristic. I mean, I've done all sorts of things. Where are you located? And getting, as the actor, you're getting, I would say, really specific in where you're telling this story. The why and the how of it, like how you're going to lay it out. So again, if you ask different voice actors, you might get different responses, but I really like to set that scene of who am I talking to? Why is this important? And then it just makes it come alive more because as you're reading on the microphone, you're believing and communicating those details. And I think sometimes in the e-learning world, maybe because people are less familiar with us as voice actors or see us as like an enigma, like something they might not think about is like, hey, we're actors, so we can go here or we can go here. I've done courses on human trafficking, which is a very serious topic. And then I've done courses on how to wrap the burrito well for Taco Bell, so we can do very different reads here. So it's not just like, and that's why it's great to reach out to a specific voice actor you're interested in and ask for a sample or listen to their demos and see the variety, figuring out what style you want your project to be. Who are you talking to? How serious is this? How playful is this? How formal is this? Things like that. So as actors, we can do a variety of things. I think sometimes people think like, well, they just do that one read, or I just hear their voice right now, so that's always what it sounds like. It's like, no, we can actually play with that and change it. I mean, I can't sound like Morgan Freeman, like we only have our limits, but still within that realm as an actor, we can do many different things.
And I think one of the things that I loved was when we had difficult terminology or somebody had a very odd name or something, you would record it. First you would write it out in hyphenated, spacing and send it to me and say, is this right? And then you would record it and just say, did I do this right? If not, I'll splice in a new one and I'll redo it. I think sometimes, and I've heard this in audiobooks where people that don't edit as well just kind of leave it. And it really is almost like a roadblock, because you're like listening along and all of a sudden you just hit this thunk. And it kind of sticks with you. And I've heard that. And I think about that when we're trying to teach people information and we're trying to, give them citations or whose theory it is and all. If you say the name wrong, that sticks with them. Yeah. And so I think it's great that you take that level of detail because it's so helpful to the end user, who ultimately is the real client. I mean,
Yes.
we're all building and putting these projects together, but ultimately the real client is the end user.
Yeah, absolutely. And like, it is a skill to go back and edit something if there's pickups or changes. And I do tell clients as well, like, hey, if it's my mistake, of course I'm recording that for free. But if there are changes or additions, that is billing again or billing differently for that, because you're right. I have to go back in there. I'm not just saying one word, and plugging it in. I'm going back and listening. Okay, what did I originally narrate? What was my voice? What was my tone? Who was I? And then coming back in and hopefully seamlessly kind of plugging that in there so the listener doesn't hear any sort of difference when changes are made. So I think sometimes people don't think of the amount of work that still has to go into like a pickup or a change to a script.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's true. Our listeners probably know this, but if they don't, anytime we build e-learning, anytime we build training, anytime we build anything online, it's the same thing. You say, well, just plug and play, pull that out and put this in. We wanted to update this PowerPoint. If you can just drop it in. Well, it's one, making sure you have a license for whatever they did. It's logging in. It's making sure that you're extracting what's old, putting in what's new. If they change the intro, now do we need to change something here? I can remember one time where we had to have you record because some of the things that you said were no longer living in the PowerPoint.
Sure.
They had been, eliminated. And, that brings me to the point of one of the things that I know you and I talked about, and you may have better recommendations for our listeners also, but not date time stamping your recording so much that they don't have some shelf life, or that they require massive changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, if there's like certain years or certain, that's hard because you date yourself very quickly if you're citing different things. And even just with COVID, I do a lot of like medical type narration or HIPAA training or things like that, so even just seeing over the past couple of years, like the COVID-19 terms and regulations and things coming into play. So, I mean, in some level, that's if you have to update it, you have to update it. But yeah, if you can help your course by not putting that in there, maybe give it a little longer shelf life that's appropriate. Yeah.
Because I think too, we forget sometimes, even just referring to things, we say, oh, well, in the spring. Well, if we run the course in the spring, it doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
If we run it in the fall and we say, well, next spring, then people are like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So we try to, stay away from those things. But then we have to make sure that your audio goes with what it is that we've built, so that for the learner, it's seamless and it makes sense to them. It's not contradicting.
Yeah. And even stuff that, again, I'm not sure clients would even have the thought or a reason to think about this, but like my voice is different at 8 a.m. versus 8 p.m. Like it literally can sound different. And so sometimes I'll look back at my original timestamp and say, when did I record this during the day? Because in the morning, our voices are usually a little deeper and more groggy and things like that. So I'm pretty cautious to not record within a certain time frame, but like trying to fit something in midday. So yeah, it's a lot of thought and effort that goes into all that.
So the other thing that I think is interesting is, when's a good point to decide that you actually want to add voiceover to your project?
I mean, I would say as early as possible, but I am continually surprised by the amount of clients that don't think about it till after the fact. Especially even in the commercial world, it's even worse than e-learning. Some of my e-learning clients are surprised, but sometimes, they need something back same day.
Wow.
So I say with my clients, like, hey, I want to get you stuff within 24 to 48 hours. Of course, if it's really long, like it might be a little more. And, I always tell people as well, like, if you have a time frame, please let me know if you need it back by X date. And e-learning is usually more forgiving. Usually it's a week or two. It's not like within that day. But yeah, like as you write your course, trying to figure out, again, the style of voice you want for it. Do you want a man? Do you want a woman? Do you want someone younger, older? Do you want someone middle-aged? But I'd say early on, if you can pick someone just to even build that rapport and that relationship and get going from there.
So we've talked a lot about, the end user and the clients and how everybody uses this, but let's say one of our listeners wants to get started in this field. Like, what are the kinds of things they need to invest in to get going?
Ooh, yeah, we could have a whole class just on that. A microphone. So, a space to record in, like going into the conference room is probably not a great idea. This is actually a hall closet that I converted under my stairs. So when I first started recording, I have a photo somewhere, but literally it was a closet and I would record like here in between the coats. Yeah. Which actually is really helpful because you need stuff to like help with the sound and things like that. So it depends on your setup. So you need like a studio space to record in. And then again, like just taking the time to invest in the money in like acting, acting classes, acting coach, voiceover coaches. There's a lot of good people out there to choose from. I would say, and just getting your feet wet, just auditioning. In our industry, they say it's not uncommon to do 100 auditions before you book something.
Wow.
It can feel overwhelming and it can feel daunting. And, just knowing your personality, I think at the beginning I said, I'm going to give this 6 months and then see how it goes. I'm going to give this a year and see how it goes. But there were a couple of times in there where I thought, am I going to do this? Is this going to be fruitful? Is it going to keep going? And I'm so glad, of course, now hindsight, looking back, that I didn't quit, but it's definitely keeping the long game in mind and just building relationships. I mean, I think even you and I probably reached out to you early on, like in LinkedIn, and just, again, we could have a whole conversation about this, trying to reach out in a way that's like authentic of like, hey, I'm a human being, you're a human being, just building a relationship, not being too salesy or pushy, or, as a business owner, you're always trying to figure that out. But I think even we didn't work together for maybe a couple of years. I don't know. Yeah. It was a while. It was definitely a while before you had something. So me as well, as an entrepreneur, trying to figure out how to stay top of mind or relevant in a way that's not annoying.
That is so true. It was a couple years, and it was funny because just as we were getting started, the initial idea, I remember clearly, it was 3 different clients. And the initial idea was, we'd kind of like to test voiceover in a couple of things. And let's just see how it goes. And then maybe if we like it, we'll use it, sparingly. This course, but not that course. This product, but not that product. And then in the fall of 18, they started talking about there's some weird virus, and it's overseas and we don't know what it is. And then winter came and they were like, oh my gosh, it's hit the US and we don't know what this means and we don't know what to do. And I can remember having a conversation with one of the clients who said, maybe we ought to do more voiceover just in case. So we're like, good. So I reached out to you, and we were just talking small couple products and all. And then spring came and everything started to shut down. And all of a sudden it was like, okay, we're full bore. Here we go.
Yes. Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah. And so, but it was funny because I've had a lot of people reach out to me on LinkedIn. I've had a lot of people email me over the years. The difference was that, you sent me a soundbite, you sent me a link to your website. Your website's informative, so I know what you've done, who you've worked with and such. Your soundbite, and I should tell the clients, the end users out here that the soundbite is multiple things put together. Yes. So I hear her do multiple commercials or readings. So I get a flavor of your scope of talent. Mm-hmm. And that was really valuable because I was shopping for 3 different people, 3 different products. And so I was like, okay, how do we make this work? And how many voiceover people do I have to hire? Yeah. And then I was like, she could do all of it. This is going to be easy. And they're all good with a female voice and they're all good with hearing her voice. And so we're good to go. I think other times when I've gotten reach outs, it's been more of a, hey, I'm a voiceover actor. If you need to hire me, let me know. And that doesn't quite do it for me, again, because I'm not the end decision maker. I need to share with somebody. And I also need to talk them through it. I need to talk to them, they're about, are you comfortable with this person? What's their turnaround? And you are always very prompt in your responses and such. All of that goes back to my client because, as you said, I'm just the middleman.
Yeah.
And so that makes a huge difference too, because if I'm waiting 5 days for you to respond, and then I still have to get back to them, that's a tough thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think, for our listeners, understanding how to reach out and understanding what's vital and what's important to people, I think is such a great thing to learn from today, because even if you're not looking at voiceover work, but if you're trying to do something and you're reaching out through LinkedIn, there's a great way to do it and there's a less great way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're all being inundated. We're getting tons of emails from people, and some of them are just pushy and some of them don't really explain what it is that's coming out. And so I think, Rachel, you've given us some really great pointers today. So one of the other things that I wanted to ask you about is you mentioned that you have a gift for our listeners if they're interested.
Yeah, I would love to, if people need a custom audition or recording or just want to hear their stuff, like I would love to give a sample of that, like to narration. Even if, sometimes budget's an issue with voiceover, I would love for you to take Larry in accounting and his 30 seconds of the script and my 30 seconds and take it to the powers that be and the supervisor and say, hey, what do you think right here? So I think any voice actor, I think we were talking about this before we hit record, but that's worth their salt is willing to give that sample and willing to put themselves out there a little bit. And now, of course, probably someone's not going to narrate the whole course for free, but just to give a little snippet of because people often want to hear their words, they can hear your demos. And like you said, you have several different voices on there. So it's good to see that difference. But just to give a custom demo and just a little bit of your time to serve their script and make their text come alive, would love to do that.
Wonderful. So listeners, if you are in the business of putting out even your own courses, a lot of people right now, entrepreneurs, are doing their own courses and pushing them out. And, they're looking at it as a revenue stream, which is fantastic, but why not make them better? We can all do them and we can all record ourselves. And it's kind of okay sometimes and it's kind of not okay sometimes. The other thing I wanted to point out is I know sometimes for audiobooks, people like to have the actual author read, but you also do some great bookends like you did for our intro and outro for this podcast.
Yeah.
And we use them regularly. It's fantastic that you can still have a great introduction to a project, and then you can still be the reader if you're the author and it's really important that it's your voice. But also bring in talent to really just surround that project.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. Yeah.
So, Rachel, really appreciate you being here today. So excited to always talk to you, obviously, because we just enjoy working with you. And I will tell our listeners that Rachel is one of the best in the business, both from a perspective of her talent, but also how she runs her business. You make our world so much easier when we hand you things and know they come right back. We know what they're going to be like. We know how they're going to be packaged. I can honestly say that we did over 200 projects with you, and I think we only edited 2 of them. And that was changes on the client side. So listeners, know that she's the real deal. When we send it to her, we get back exactly what we want. And then obviously we used her for our podcast because we love having her here. So anything else you want to add today?
Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate that. Don't be afraid to ask questions, I guess would be the thing I would say. If you're reaching out to voice actors or kind of dipping your toe in the water, they should be able to answer budget questions, quote questions, getting that custom audition. Don't be afraid to reach out to several or get a personal referral from someone that you've, seen on LinkedIn, or maybe a colleague has worked with them. I just feel like that goes a long way. And even I'm happy to refer. I had a client recently that, really needed a male voice for something. So was happy to refer someone in particular. We have people we work with as well. So there's always enough work to go around. I don't believe in that scarcity mindset of I have to protect this. So I would just ask and reach out there. There's no question too silly or too small. So
wonderful. So I want to thank you for being on with us today. This has been so much fun. And for my listeners, I really hope that you're taking notes on this one, because this is one that really can make or break, really adding value and quality to what it is that you're designing and pushing out. And for your end users, it really attracts them. People like having lots of different types of stimulation in courses, in training. As you all know, we have commercials that stick in our heads forever and commercials that we totally just ignore. There's a reason for that. And part of it is that voice. So thank you again, Rachel, for being here. For our listeners, we will provide all of her contact information wherever you listen to your podcast, at Spotify or Apple, Audible. And until we meet again next time, keep learning.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to EdTech Speaks with EdTech strategist Cher Downing. To learn more about the services Downing EdTech and its staff can provide you, find us at www.downingedtech.com. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to share it. We'd also like to hear from you regarding any suggestions for topics or guests and the value you received from our show. Check back for new podcasts with featured guests at www.downingedtech.com/podcast.